They laughed at her, and when the teacher tried to humiliate her in front of the class, she did something no one expected. Because hidden beneath the ridicule and whispers was a mind sharper than they could ever imagine. And in a single moment, she silenced them all. Stay tuned as I narrate Angela's story. The golden California sun bathed the backyard in a soft, honey glow. Laughter filled the air as children dashed across the well-manicured lawn, their excited voices mixing with the sound of birds retreating for the evening. It was a rare family gathering, one that hadn't happened in years. Angela Whitefeather stood at the edge of the yard, her fingers clutching the hem of her simple blue dress, her dark brown eyes scanning the scene before her. Her uncle, Thomas Whitefeather, had just returned from New York City after 5 long years, and to celebrate, he had arranged a treasure hunt for all the children in the family. Angela watched as her cousins, dressed in expensive outfits, sprinted through the yard, laughing as they searched for the hidden prizes. Unlike them, Angela didn't rush. She stood still, analyzing the clues written on a small slip of paper. The first clue read, "Where stories live and minds grow wide, seek the words where secrets hide." The other kids ran blindly toward the toy chest near the fence, but Angela tilted her head, deep in thought. Stories, words, books. Her eyes darted toward the large oak tree near the patio, where a small wooden bookshelf sat with a few scattered books. She moved quickly but gracefully, her braids bouncing against her back. When she reached the bookshelf, she crouched down and felt behind the books. Her fingers touched something smooth and cold. A key. Her heart leaped with excitement. Angela turned to watch her cousins still struggling near the fence, arguing over an empty toy chest. She hesitated. Should she tell them? But just as she was about to speak, a voice behind her made her pause. "Well, well," Uncle Thomas said, his deep voice warm with amusement. "Looks like someone is thinking before acting." Angela glanced up at him, her lips pressing together in a nervous smile. I just figured the clue meant books, not toys." Uncle Thomas crouched beside her, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "That's called problem-solving, Angela. And from what I've seen, you do it better than anyone else here." Angela lowered her gaze, her confidence faltering. She had never been praised for being smart. At school, she was invisible. At home, she was loved, but she often felt like she was playing catch-up with a world that judged her for wearing second-hand clothes and speaking with a slightly different accent. "Come on," Uncle Thomas said, standing up and offering his hand. "Let's find the next clue together." By the end of the treasure hunt, Angela had solved every clue before anyone else, leading her team to victory. As the other children pouted, Uncle Thomas sat back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. He had watched his nieces and nephews run around, but something about Angela had caught his attention. Her patience, her logic, the way she pieced things together instead of following the crowd. Later that evening, as the adults gathered in the living room for drinks and conversation, Uncle Thomas pulled Angela's mother aside. "Your daughter, she's special," he said. Angela's mother, a quiet woman with tired eyes, chuckled. "All children are special, Tom." "No," he insisted, shaking his head. "I mean it. She thinks differently. She's sharp, really sharp. I watched her today, and she was ahead of everyone. Not because she ran the fastest, but because she thought the fastest." Angela's mother sighed. "She's always been smart, but you know how things are. She doesn't get the same opportunities as the other kids at school. They mock her, call her poor. She's starting to believe she's not enough." Uncle Thomas leaned forward. "That's exactly why I want to help. I want to enroll her in a better school, one with more resources, where she can be challenged and nurtured. I'll cover the costs." Angela's mother's eyes widened. "Tom, that's too much." "It's not," he interrupted. "This girl has something special. She just needs the right place to grow." The following week, Angela's life changed. She was transferred from her small public school to one of the most prestigious private academies in California. Her uniform was secondhand, but her mother had pressed it carefully. She had a simple backpack, no designer labels, no expensive lunchbox. Walking into the new school, Angela felt like a shadow among the bright, glittering children who whispered as she passed. "Who's the new girl? Did she get in on a scholarship?" The first few days were brutal. Her classmates, especially two girls named Samantha and Olivia, constantly found ways to belittle her. They laughed at her accent, mimicked the way she pronounced words, and scoffed at her plain clothes. "Did you even buy that uniform, or did they hand it to you for free?" Olivia sneered one afternoon. Angela swallowed her frustration, reminding herself that she was here for a reason. The prestigious private school stood tall under the bright California sun, its red brick walls lined with ivy, its windows gleaming. Inside, the halls were immaculate, polished floors reflecting the expensive shoes of students who walked confidently, knowing they belonged. Angela, however, felt like an outsider. Her footsteps echoed as she walked to class, her small hands gripping her books tightly. She tried to ignore the murmurs around her, the way her classmates would giggle and nudge each other whenever she passed. Her uniform, slightly faded compared to the crisp, new ones her peers wore, made her stand out in the worst way. But it wasn't just the students who made her feel small. It was Mrs. Grant. Mrs. Grant stood at the front of the math class, her arms crossed, her piercing gaze sweeping the room. She was a tall woman with sharp features and an air of superiority, the kind of teacher who believed intelligence was something you were born into, a privilege, not something that could be earned. Angela sat quietly at her desk, her pencil trembling in her hand. She tried to stay invisible, to avoid the teacher's attention, but it was impossible. She had mispronounced a word while reading aloud earlier that morning in literature class. Analyses, she had stammered. The room had erupted into laughter. Mrs. Grant had smiled condescendingly and said, "Maybe we should stick to something simple for you." Angela had wanted to disappear, and now it was math class. The moment where she feared Mrs. Grant would strike again. The teacher tapped her manicured nails against the board before turning, her eyes landing on Angela with a smirk. "Angela," she said, her voice dripping with mockery, "why don't you come up here and solve this?" Angela's heart sank. Mrs. Grant picked up the chalk and slowly, deliberately, wrote a fraction problem on the board. 3/6 equals /12. Then, stepping back, she crossed her arms and gestured toward the board. "Since you claim to be such a smart girl, show us the answer." The class erupted into snickers. Samantha and Olivia, the two girls who always found a way to humiliate Angela, whispered loudly, "She probably doesn't even know what a fraction is." Angela swallowed hard. Her legs felt like stone as she rose from her desk and walked to the board. She could feel the weight of their stares, the expectation that she would fail. Mrs. Grant handed her the chalk, an amused look on her face. "Go on, dear. We don't have all day." Angela stared at the equation. Her hands trembled as she held the chalk. The whispers behind her became louder, turning into a low hum of ridicule. "She's going to mess up. She doesn't belong here. She probably thinks you just add the numbers." Angela squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. And then she remembered. Melissa. Her elder sister had taught her fractions one night under the dim glow of their bedroom lamp. "It's like a puzzle," Melissa had said, flipping through her math book. "If the denominator changes, the numerator has to change in the same way." Angela took a deep breath. She whispered the numbers under her breath. 6 times what gives 12. The answer came to her. She knew that to find the missing number, she had to multiply the numerator and denominator by the same value. Since 6x2 equals 12, she had to do the same to the 3. 3x2 equals 6. Angela's hand moved steadily as she wrote the answer. 3/6 equals 6/12. Silence. Angela turned slowly to face the class, expecting laughter. But no one laughed. The room was still. Mrs. Grant's smirk had vanished. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she had just been caught off guard. Samantha and Olivia, who had been whispering just seconds ago, exchanged confused glances. "Wait," one of the boys in the back muttered. "How did she do that so fast?" Angela's breath caught in her throat. Did she just do that? She looked at Mrs. Grant, who cleared her throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Well," the teacher muttered, clearly annoyed. "That was acceptable." She turned sharply and erased the board with unnecessary force. Angela felt something stir inside her, something small but powerful, a flicker of confidence. For the first time since arriving at this school, she had proven something, not just to them, but to herself. And though Mrs. Grant tried to brush it off, Angela saw something in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, a sign that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as powerless as they all thought. The classroom was different. No longer filled with stifled laughter or careless whispers, it was thick with something else. Curiosity, uncertainty. For the first time, Angela wasn't just the girl they ridiculed. She had solved the problem on the board faster than anyone had expected. And now, for the first time, Mrs. Grant was the one caught off guard. But the teacher wasn't ready to let this moment of triumph stand. With a forced smile, she stepped forward, tapping the chalk against her palm. "Well, that was a lucky guess," she said, her voice tight. "Let's see if you can handle something harder." Angela swallowed hard. She had barely gotten through the last problem without her nerves betraying her. But she wasn't about to back down now. Not when, for the first time, the room was watching her with something other than pity. Mrs. Grant turned to the board and wrote out a new equation. Solve. 2/5 plus 3/10. The students braced themselves, leaning forward in their seats. This was it, the moment Angela would surely falter. Angela stared at the problem. She could feel her hands trembling again. But then she heard a familiar voice in her mind. Melissa's voice. "Angela, when you're adding fractions, the first thing you do is find a common denominator. It's like speaking the same language. Both fractions need to match before they can work together." She inhaled deeply. The denominators were 5 and 10. She needed to make them the same. She knew the least common multiple of 5 and 10 was 10. She converted 2/5 into 4/10 by multiplying both the numerator and denominator by 2. The second fraction, 3/10, stayed the same. Now she just needed to add. 4/10 plus 3/10 equals 7/10. Angela hesitated only for a second before stepping forward and writing. Answer, 7/10. She capped the marker, her heart pounding against her ribs. The moment no one expected. The silence that followed was deafening. Angela turned around slowly. The entire classroom was frozen in place. Her stomach clenched. Melissa had seen her win. And suddenly, the fear in Angela's chest melted. The teacher wasn't speaking. She wasn't correcting Angela. She was simply staring at the answer. Angela had done it. Twice. Mrs. Grant opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Angela felt something rise inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Confidence. Angela stepped out of the classroom that day feeling something different. Freedom. For the first time since coming to this school, she wasn't walking with her head down, avoiding the snickers and whispers. She wasn't ashamed anymore. The sneers were still there, but they were quieter. The giggles weren't as loud. Even Samantha and Olivia, who once led the taunts, now only watched her in curiosity. Something had shifted. Some of her classmates, the same ones who had once mocked her, started asking her questions. "Angela, how did you do that so fast? Can you show me how you figured it out?" They weren't teasing anymore. They genuinely wanted to know. Angela didn't say much. She just smiled. A real, unshaken smile. She had nothing to prove anymore. Angela's parents noticed it first. She was reading more, solving math problems in her notebook long after dinner, scribbling equations in the margins of her books. Uncle Thomas heard of her improvement. All sums up. The confidence in her voice, too, when he called to check up on her. "You know what the best part of being smart is, Angela?" he asked. "That no one can ever take it away from you." She finally understood. A week later, Samantha and Olivia tried to make peace. "Hey, Angela," Samantha said one afternoon, fidgeting with the hem of her designer sweater. Angela glanced up from her notebook. "We were thinking, maybe you could help us with our math homework sometime," Olivia added, her tone unusually friendly. Angela studied them for a moment. A few months ago, she would have been desperate for their approval. But now, she didn't need it. She didn't need them. "I don't know," Angela said, tucking her pencil behind her ear. "I thought I was too simple for this school." Samantha flushed. Olivia looked away. Angela didn't wait for them to respond. She simply turned back to her work. She had more important things to focus on. At the end, she was still wearing her simple clothes. She was still speaking with her native accent. But now there was something different about her. Respect. And the best part, she had earned it. Was Mrs. Grant fair to Angela? Was her mockery an act of cruelty or a push toward greatness? And what about Angela's classmates? Would they have respected her if she hadn't proven herself? Let's hear your thoughts. Should we continue Angela's journey or explore another powerful story? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the world underestimates the quietest minds until they rise.